Left of the box. But why don't we get started with the flooding in Toronto? There's a lot of it. And, again, big picture, it's not just that there were floods, but it's everything that kind of led to the floods and what the floods mean and all that sort of stuff. Laura here is saying, and Ford wants to build a mega spa, casino, underwater parking garage at Ontario Place, Highway 413, and destroy the green belt when climate change mitigation should be his priority. I don't blame him for today's flood. I blame him for what he's doing to make them worse. And yes, he is moving the Science Center, a heritage landmark here in Ontario. And he's moving it to here that you see on your screen. There's supposed to be underground parking where this is going up. The new spa, the luxury spa, it's going up. And that's Lakeshore Boulevard there. So just toss in some underground parking. What could go wrong? What could go wrong? More, this is Lakeshore Boulevard. Again, just this is where that luxury spa is moving to. I just want to say to people, when you see this, do not drive in it. Never. If you can avoid it, like, unfortunately, I think a lot of these people didn't see it ahead of time because they were just stuck in the traffic. But if you're ever approaching a road that has water over it and you can't see the bottom, do not drive on it. Unless you're willing to have somebody go ahead of you, because in that way, if there's a massive sinkhole, they'll go in it and you'll know to stop. Part of it is too, you have no idea how deep that water is. So a lot of people, when they see, especially under bridges, they'll see water, but they won't think it's all that bad and they'll go through it only to find out the water's like 5 feet deep and your car gets stuck and you have to get rescued from your car and things of that sort. So just like kind of as a PSA, never drive in this if you can avoid it. But like I said, I think a lot of these people were already on the road before they even saw that. And here is the Don Valley Parkway. Right there. Yeah, that was some great planning. Well, at the time, like you can see here in the picture too, it's actually bigger this way. In the background here, you can see the cars are pretty submerged. Like there's a van it's up to the hood. Because again, it's hard to tell how deep this water is when you're just approaching it. But the person just saying, this picture is, in essence, the state of Toronto, a once world-class city, clunky, sprawling 500 square feet condo developments at 2,300 units per month, because Toronto, very expensive city. An artery highway built next to a river in a floodplain, longest commute in North America, among the highest costing in the world, vast subgrade infrastructure in need of repair and replacement, and sections at 60 to 100 years old, and no notable transportation infrastructure improvements since the 80s. Yeah. And then just other cities, high-speed rails, better roads, more infrastructure. This is what happens when the province just gets neglectful, undoing a lot of the things, and municipalities put it off because, oh no, the money. It would cost a lot of money to make a new road or a subway or something of that sort. This is what happens when you just neglect it. And we'll get into roughly how much this is potentially going to be costing people and, well, people, the province, the city in just a moment. But we, as people who live in cities, municipalities, provincial governments, federal governments, climate change is here. It's here. And we need to start adapting our infrastructure, start changing it so that things like this don't happen. Because I haven't heard of anyone dying because of these floods, but there's going to be a lot of people that have lost a lot. Just here, water safety, haha. Yeah, you're going to work, take your life jacket with you. But let's see. Let's just go back to this one for a moment. So if you see water like this, especially when you see it on city roads and in towns and stuff like that, just think of all the people who have basement apartments. What do you think would happen to those apartments? And I remember when there was some severe flooding in New York and some people did pass away, a lot of the times it's because they get trapped in their basement apartments. And even if you don't get trapped, even if it only goes up a certain amount, chances are you're going to lose a lot. And the people who live in basement apartments are usually renters who can't afford much. It's people on the, you know, as I always say, people with the least suffer the most. And so people who are struggling with rent the most that end up in basement apartments, a flood like this hits town, you lose everything, everything. And sometimes like even your life. But here we go. Not a disaster movie, says Jennifer. This is Union Station. Ah, that was loud. Wow. Union Station right there. Let's maybe mute that. There we go. Yeah, that would be a very pretty fountain if it wasn't a fountain, like if it was a fountain. It'd be a very pretty fountain to just kind of have that, but instead it's like the stairs on Union Station in Toronto, which is like the transportation hub. It's where the train comes in and stuff. That's that is potentially very dangerous. Got another view of it, Union Station. It would be a very pretty fountain, but here, and for people who live with disabilities and have mobility issues and stuff, this type of thing can strand you in different places. Like if this shuts down escalator, stairs, and elevators and stuff because the water in the systems, then wherever you are, you're stranded because you can't go up and down these stairs. And just people who have canes and stuff makes it a lot more dangerous and slippery for them to walk on. But like here's one of the main hubs in Toronto. Lots of money has gone into Union Station to modernize it. And this is what you get. An unintentional, very pretty waterfall. Oh, just another picture of it flooded. So as you can see, these escalators are not running right now because there's water. Water and electricity don't work. I would never want to be in a subway when floods are hitting. Like they have pumping stations and stuff to make sure they don't flood, but I saw the nightmare scenarios that were happening in like China the one time where one of those systems failed and the subway systems were flooding and people were up to their necks and oh my God. Again, don't drive in this. Don't go in subways if you can at all prevent yourself from doing that. No matter how safe they say, just don't. For your own well-being, don't. And just more of the Don River against the Don Valley Parkway. Yeah, that's Canada's infrastructure there for you. And instead what they do is they shut down the Science Center because of a few roof panels needing replacement, as opposed to, making sure that we have better waterways and floodplains and ways to divert the water. Yeah, and you see people here, again, they're going under the bridge. Gets a lot deeper under there. It's not safe. And the fact that they didn't like stop people from doing that, like as long as there's a car going in front of you, you'll know if there's a pothole, at least, or if there's like a sinkhole that you would sink into. But then this is what happens. If you can't tell how deep it is, your car gets stuck, you get stuck, and you don't want to be in floodwater. You just don't want to be in floodwater because it's not clean. It's tons of chemicals. Sewers can get backed up, so you have biological material. It is very dangerous to be in floodwater. I've seen pictures and videos of people like playing in floodwater before because it was like, ooh, this novelty. There's like water in our streets and we can, no, don't, don't. It's very dangerous to be in for more than one reason. And let's see if I go to this one. This is a prime reason why you should never walk around in floodwater unless you have a stick in front of you. Where's that water coming up from? A manhole. you know, those big heavy manholes. Sometimes the floods can get so powerful, it removes the lid. And if you're walking around in these floods and you can't see if one is missing right in front of you, that is nightmare fuel right there. You do not want to step into one of those that might be uncovered when there's a flood like that, because there'd be currents and stuff too. You would never get back out, which is just, again, horrifying to think of. So if you need to walk around in a flood, like even if it looks like it's just, you know, that deep, but you can't see the bottom, have a stick with you, like a walking stick, a cane or something, just to poke in front of you so that you can actually see, you know, or know if there's suddenly an opening in front of you that you aren't aware of. Because sometimes you see the whirlpools going into drains and stuff, so that gives you an indication, okay, there's an opening here. But if it's equally flooded underneath, you're not going to get that. So again, just be really, really careful with this sort of thing. City Hall. Yeah, that's it's raining inside of the City Hall of Toronto. Uh-huh. And again, they're shutting down the Science Center because a few roof panels needed to be replaced by the winter for the snow that might be happening. Not that there might be much snow anymore with climate change. But they decided to shut down the Science Center as opposed to repairing that. So I think we need to shut down Toronto City Hall. If we're going to go by that standard, we just need to shut it all down because, yeah, as somebody is saying, we've got $1 billion+ police force, but a city that uses waste bins to catch leaks. Remember, our aged infrastructure buckles under weather events due to dudes from Burlington make six figures and harass cyclists in park. And yes, there is Toronto's budget for their police is $1.198 billion. And they're using recycling bins so that the carpet doesn't get soggy. I think that money could be spent better than with the police who like to harass cyclists, like to harass unhoused people. You know, we don't need that much money in a police force, especially when there's things like this that obviously should be looked after. And then this is the other problem that happens when you have these sorts of floods is power outages. So this is Lorenda. So the power is out at the CBC newsroom. Never in all my years working here has this ever happened. And of course, when the power goes out, there's just a whole litany of problems. Especially, again, if you live with disabilities and you rely on an elevator, then you're trapped either in your apartment or on the floor you happen to be on. If you're living with poverty and the power goes out for long enough, everything in your fridge will spoil. Then it'll have to be replaced. But how are you supposed to do that if you're living with poverty? Like, these are the things that a lot of people don't tend to think of in these sorts of disasters, is how different kinds of people suffer differently, depending on how much money you have, if you have a disability and stuff. Because if it's hard for an able-bodied person to get around in these flood situations, if you have mobility restrictions, so much harder. So much harder. And again, it's the people with the least who suffer the most. And a lot of this could be prevented with better urban planning. Or do you know what else really helps? There's these things in Ontario called wetlands. Got its name because they're wet and it's on land, and they're called wetlands. And a lot of those areas just tend to soak up all that water and make it so that cities aren't flooded. But you know what happens when you start cutting these wetland areas, if you want to pave over them for a new highway and stuff? Ontario cuts Conservation Authority's funding for flood programs. Ontario seeing more intense, more frequent flooding events in recent years. This article It's from April 21st, 2019. Pretty much as soon as Doug Ford got into office, one of the cuts that he was making is to the conservation authorities for flooding programs, you know. Ontario conservation authorities say the provincial government has cut their funding for flood management programs in half. Conservation Ontario, which represents the province's 36 conservation authorities, said impacts of the cuts will be felt immediate, particularly in small and more rural areas. Cutting natural hazard funding in particular is problematic right now in light of the fact that, like everywhere else, Ontario's experienced stronger and more frequent flood events as a result of climate change impacts, General Manager Kim said in a statement. Using a watershed-based approach, conservation authorities deliver effective and cost-effective, efficient flood management programs across the province, partnering for many years with the province, municipalities, and others. Ontario has given $7.4 million to conservation authorities for that work, but they say that has now been reduced by 50%. And then we see the consequences of it. And instead of doing something like funding these conservation authorities, we have a provincial government that's looking to pave over part of the Greenbelt, part of the area that would help with this flooding. So instead of making infrastructure to withstand this, the provincial government is actively making infrastructure that will exacerbate this. Because would this flood have happened without climate change? Maybe, maybe not. It's just they become more frequent and more severe with climate change. And they become more severe with poor management of wetlands, of conservation lands, of poor city planning. When you have so much concrete and it funnels water into different areas, there's nowhere for it to just be absorbed into the ground anymore. And then it just goes down streets and into people's apartments. But instead of spending money on that, something that the Doug Ford government will spend money on is throwaway costs. Doug Ford ordered Highway 413 signs, then replace them weeks later. So that's the Highway 413 that's going to be cutting through a swath of this, very precious land. That's a highway that's totally unneeded, that apparently won't do anything to really reduce the times that people spend on the 401, which is the main highway between my area and Toronto. But, it's important to have these signs and then replace them weeks later because Doug Ford resized them. Let's see. The giant blue signs are designed to be impossible for drivers to miss. Commuters chugging along the Greater Toronto Area's vast highways networks over the past few months have been confronted with promotional signs touting the construction of Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass, two signature projects that Doug Ford views as key to helping him win over voters. Not so much flooding would also help win over voters. Let's just see. Like the amount for these signs in particular, when you add it up in the grand scheme of things, is not that much. But when you start taking into account all the places he's wasting money, all the places he's no longer getting money from, like the LCBO, we'll be getting into that in a little bit. Getting rid of registration fees for license and all that sort of stuff. So we're constantly losing money in the coffers. But then there's these little side projects of his where he just likes to spend money. And, instead of spending money on things to help with the floods, the infrastructures, people's actual lives, he's putting it into promotional signage on the highway, which is just totally not needed. And this is where some of the cost gets into. The cost of widespread flood in Toronto could easily surpass $1 billion, according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada. That's the cost of climate change. I'm not going to click on this article because it's from the Star, and I have another article open from the Star that I want to touch on. Well, it's already open, so it should be safe to see. You just have so many articles per month with them that it gets annoying because then you can't see anything more. Overland flooding insurance, which protects against water coming through cracks or windows in basements, is limited and expensive in the GTA as it's not covered by basic policies. So a lot of these people who might lose their basement apartments, lose their, places that they work and stuff of that sort, won't actually then be covered by insurance. So they'll just lose it all because it's not covered by basic policies. And a lot of people can't afford, especially with the cost of renting space in Toronto, can't necessarily afford a more advanced one. But here is a closer picture of that, closer view of that picture I was showing earlier. So as you can see, it's right up to the hood of this van. You never know. The only time you can risk it if you're in this scenario and you see these cars in front of you making it through. But if your car isn't up to snuff and then you get stuck in there, then everyone is stuck behind you as well. Ah, there we go. See, I reached the monthly limit because I opened up one other article. One other article. It gives you one article per month. Come on, Toronto Star. The total cost of Tuesday's flash flood in Toronto could easily surpass $1 billion, which is the same as their police budget. So it shouldn't be a problem. If they have that much money for the police budget, surely they have enough money for this. And the government and homeowners will be paying for most of it. According to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, IBC, Tuesday's storm is comparable to the historic 2013 flood in Toronto, which resulted in $1 billion insurance, residential and commercial damage, adjusted for inflation in 2021, and was among the 10 most expensive natural disasters in Canada. And that's all I get to see in my monthly limited of the Toronto Star. So many people say we can't afford to update the infrastructure or to build homes that are more resistant to climate change, build new buildings that are more resistant to climate change. We can't afford it. It's just so much. It's just so much. Not doing it is a lot more. Ends up costing a lot more. And again, it's the people with the least who suffer the most, the people who can't afford the insurance that would cover these things, lose everything, lose their livelihood, lose their homes, having to start over from scratch without insurance money. We can't afford to not address climate change now. Like, where's the money? There won't be any money in the future for covering the cost of all these natural disasters that happen. But on a little bit of a lighter note with this flood that happened, that's Drake's mansion right there. Drake just posted this story of what seems to be him walking around with a broom while his mansion is flooding. And then Surf saying, Drake lost so badly that God is unleashing plagues upon his house. I don't know why. How loud? That's so loud in my ears. I don't know why you would want to post that, and what are you doing with the broom? It's not gonna help much. And that doesn't even look like a home. It looks like a department store, a luxury department store. He can afford it. That's the thing. He can afford it. He can afford to make light of it. He can afford to walk around with it in a broom. But so many people who live paycheck to paycheck, live with poverty, live with disabilities, if this is happening to their home, they can't afford it. They can't afford to replace their stuff. But then there's also this from T. Resident. Wonderful Twitter account to go follow if you're still on the hostile fart sauna. New Doug Ford campaign video just dropped, and yes, that is a dumpster being pushed along in the floodwaters. The only thing it's missing is a flame, but I think all of the flames are just, they're happening south of the border right now. That dumpster fire is just taking so much oxygen from the surrounding areas. We can't even have a dumpster fire right now. That's how bad it is in the United States. There's not enough oxygen up here for actual dumpster fire. Oh, Midi Doctor's asking, how unusual is this? I visited Toronto twice, never heard of flooding. Um, it's not common, not like Miami or anything of that sort, but it's not terribly uncommon. To this extent, a little bit more uncommon, but there was like a massive amount of rain that fell in a short period of time and it builds up. And again, with all the concrete and stuff, it just gets funneled because there's nowhere for it to run off properly. You saw the Don River, which was just flooded and went onto the Don Valley Parkway. Because in some areas like Los Angeles and stuff, you see those concrete waterways that the water can go down in these situations, and Toronto doesn't have those. They have the natural Don River to take care of a lot of that, and runs into the lake, but as you can see, it's not effective anymore. Not with the amount of rain and stuff that we're looking at these days. And with all the cuts, and here's the infuriating thing is I was seeing some people commenting saying, oh, this is because of Olivia Chow and her management of the city. She's been mayor for like, what, not even a year? This isn't on her. Like, how about the 6 mayors previous to her that were all conservative? How about the conservative provincial government that was doing the cutbacks to like the conservation authorities? You know, it's always conservatives love to deflect the blame whenever there's somebody a little bit more left-leaning nearby. But it's like there's nothing Olivia could have done in her time in office right now that would have prevented that. Nothing. Because these types of structural infrastructure things, it takes decades to get that bad. And it needs, like, that's the thing, we need to start working on it now to prepare for the weather events happening 10 years from now. And we're not doing it because, ooh, climate change is so far in the future. No, it's happening now. Climate change is now.